"You old woman, go find somewhere else to die. You're useless now." Those were the words my daughter, Kelly, screamed at me one chilly spring evening. I can still hear them ringing in my ears, sharp and merciless, like glass shattering on a kitchen floor. I stood in the hallway of my own home, suitcase in hand, feeling smaller than I had ever felt in my 67 years of life. My heart pounded, not from anger but from the weight of betrayal. I had carried that girl in my arms, nursed her through fevers, stayed up at night sewing her school costumes, and now she looked at me as though I were nothing but a burden to discard. So, I did what I had always done as a mother. I obeyed. I packed my bags without a word, letting her anger push me out the door. The air outside was cool, heavy with the smell of blooming lilacs, but it didn't soothe me. It felt like the world itself was turning its back. 3 days later, I found myself in a lawyer's office, staring at papers that revealed the longest chess move my late husband had ever played. And Kelly was about to learn that even a pawn can become a queen. 2 months ago, when the first breath of spring floated through suburban Illinois, I thought life was about to soften after the long winter of grief. My husband, Frank, had been gone for just a few weeks then, and each morning I still reached for his side of the bed, only to find cold sheets and the silence of absence. The house we had built together, a 2-story colonial with pale blue shutters and a porch that wrapped around like welcoming arms, felt hollow, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Yet in that fragile season, I believed my daughter Kelly would be the anchor that steadied me. I am Linda Walker, 67 years old, hair the color of winter frost, frame so slight people often underestimate the steel that lies within. Once upon a time, I dreamed of standing in galleries, paintbrush in hand, canvases alive with the colors of the world as I saw it. But I folded those dreams away the moment I became a mother, devoting myself to raising Kelly, to being Frank's partner, to making a home that hummed with warmth and safety. My art became the careful arrangement of Sunday dinners, the tender brush strokes of bedtime stories, the palette of sacrifices only mothers seem willing to blend. Kelly, my only child, grew into a striking woman of 38. Her brunette hair always styled in the latest fashion, her heels clicking with authority wherever she went. To outsiders, she appeared polished, successful, enviable. But I had long known there was an edge to her charm, a sharpness that cut deeper than she realized. She had always been her father's favorite. Frank had a way of overlooking her flaws, brushing them off as ambition or independence, while I quietly patched the wounds left in the wake of her words. Then there was Jason Harper, Kelly's husband. At 40, he was the embodiment of a man who had spent his life sharpening his smile in boardrooms. An investment banker, he moved through conversations with the confidence of someone convinced the world owed him respect. He was courteous when Frank was alive, but after the funeral, his tone shifted, laced with condescension, as though I had become a fragile relic cluttering their lives. In the weeks following Frank's sudden heart attack, Kelly insisted on moving back into the house to help me. At first, I thought it was kindness. She fluttered around the kitchen, ordered groceries, organized bills, and spoke to me in syrupy tones that felt both foreign and unsettling. "You shouldn't have to worry about anything, Mom," she would say, brushing her manicured hand across the marble countertop. I told myself it was her way of mourning, her attempt to fill the emptiness Frank had left behind. But grief has a way of stripping away illusions. The longer she stayed, the clearer it became that her interest was not in my well-being, but in the home itself, in the bank accounts Frank and I had quietly built over 43 years of marriage. I would overhear her whispering to Jason late at night, words that turned my stomach. "Once everything's in my name, once Mom finally lets go," and Jason's voice would follow, low and certain. "It's the smart move, Kel. Think long-term." The first real fracture appeared one evening at dinner. The table was set the way Frank had always loved. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes whipped with butter, green beans glistening with garlic. I clung to those rituals, believing that if I cooked his favorite meal, some part of him might still sit with us. Kelly sat across from me, Jason at her side, their voices filling the room with the hum of superiority. Halfway through the meal, Kelly slid a stack of glossy brochures across the table. Retirement homes. Smiling elderly couples in staged gardens, their eyes vacant with practiced cheer. "Mom," Kelly began, her tone crisp, "you need to be around people your age. This house is far too much for you now." Jason dabbed his mouth with a napkin, nodding as if he were a judge confirming a sentence. "And now that Kelly's expecting again, we'll need more space. It just makes sense." I remember gripping my teacup so tightly my hands trembled. The porcelain felt fragile, the way I suddenly felt fragile in my own home. My voice caught in my throat, but before I could respond, Kelly's eyes sharpened. "Mom, stay out of our marriage. This is our house now, not yours." Huh! Her words sliced through me like icy wind. I sat frozen, my mind racing back to the promises Frank had made, to the quiet evening on the porch when he had leaned close and said, "Don't worry, Linda, you'll always be safe here." I wondered then if Kelly had ever truly loved me, or if I had been nothing more than a stepping stone toward the comfort she desired. Days bled into one another after that. Kelly and Jason began to make decisions, as if I were a guest in my own life. They rearranged furniture, canceled subscriptions, sold Frank's beloved car without a single word to me. Each time I tried to assert myself, Kelly's voice grew sharper, her patience thinner. "You've had your time, Mom. Now let us handle things." But deep within me, beneath the sorrow and the fear, a quiet defiance stirred. I had spent decades silencing my own needs, sacrificing dreams and desires for the sake of my family. And yet, in those long nights staring at the ceiling while Kelly and Jason whispered in the next room, I felt the ember of my old self flicker. Perhaps I was not as powerless as they believed. I told myself to wait, to watch, to listen, because something about Kelly's confidence felt rehearsed, fragile beneath its gloss. There was a secret she was holding too tightly. And secrets, like cracks in glass, always have a way of spreading. And so, as the lilacs bloomed in the yard and the air grew warmer, I carried my grief quietly, holding my memories of Frank close like a shield. But in the stillness of those spring nights, I began to suspect that what Kelly called care was nothing more than a mask. Behind it lay something darker, something that would soon unravel not only her plans, but the very foundation she stood upon. Because sometimes, the ones who believe they hold all the power forget that even the smallest pawn can reach the other side of the board. The evening that changed everything arrived dressed in the ordinary, as most betrayals do. The sun was setting behind the tall oaks in our backyard, casting long golden shadows across the dining room. I had spent the afternoon preparing dinner with the same devotion that had defined most of my adult life: pot roast, slow-cooked until tender, mashed potatoes whipped to perfection, carrots glazed with brown sugar, the way Frank used to love. For me, cooking was not simply about food. It was a way of holding together the threads of family, of reminding myself that love could still live at a table even when the man who anchored it was gone. The clatter of plates, the scent of rosemary and garlic, the flicker of candles on polished wood, it was my attempt at preserving dignity in the face of loss. Kelly entered the dining room with her usual flourish, the click of her heels sharp against the hardwood. Her brunette hair shone under the chandelier, her makeup flawless, her smile thin as glass. Jason followed behind her, his suit jacket still buttoned, though the workday was long over, his watch gleaming, his eyes scanning the room with the air of a man who always measured what was his. They looked less like family gathering for dinner and more like guests evaluating a property they were about to purchase. We sat together, the three of us, in the same places we always had. I bowed my head quietly before taking the first bite, whispering a prayer of gratitude to Frank, as though he might still be listening. For a brief moment, I convinced myself that perhaps the evening would pass in peace. But halfway through the meal, Kelly reached into her purse and drew out a stack of brochures, sliding them across the table as smoothly as if she were passing a contract at one of Jason's board meetings. I glanced down. Retirement communities, photographs of manicured lawns, staged gardens, elderly couples, walking hand in hand beneath artificial sunshine. Their smiles looked rehearsed, hollow, the kind of joy you can only rent for a photographer's lens. My stomach clenched, not from the food but from the bitter taste of realization. "Mom," Kelly said, her voice carrying that polished tone she used when she wanted to sound reasonable. "You need to be around people your own age. This house is simply too much for you now." Jason leaned back, his hand resting lightly on her chair, his expression smug. "And with Kelly expecting, we'll need more space. You'd be better off somewhere with proper support. It just makes sense." For a moment, I sat frozen, my fork suspended above my plate, the ticking of the grandfather clock filling the silence like a drumbeat. I had known my daughter could be sharp, even cruel in her ambition. But hearing her speak those words with such finality felt like being exiled from my own life. My hands trembled against the china, the teacup rattling in its saucer as though it, too, knew it no longer belonged here. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to remain steady, though my chest ached. "Kelly, this is my home. Your father and I built every corner of it, with our own hands, our own sacrifices. I'm not ready to leave." Her lips curled into a smile that never touched her eyes. "Mom, stay out of our marriage. This is our house now, not yours." The words struck me harder than any physical blow ever could. My heart seemed to collapse inward, and for a split second, I could hear Frank's voice echoing from the past, steady and reassuring. "You'll always be safe here, Linda." I clung to that memory, but it felt like a ghost's promise, powerless against the living cruelty of my own daughter. Jason cleared his throat, his voice calm, almost amused. "She's right. You've had your time here. Now let us take over." He sipped his wine as though the verdict had already been delivered, and all that remained was for me to accept it. I excused myself, murmuring something about dessert, and fled to the kitchen. My legs carried me faster than I thought possible for a woman of my age, but once I was out of sight, I gripped the counter with both hands, willing myself not to collapse. The marble was cool beneath my palms, grounding me as tears threatened to spill. I had spent my life being the glue, the quiet strength, the one who sacrificed dreams for the sake of harmony. But standing there, I realized that perhaps my silence had only taught Kelly that my voice did not matter. The days that followed were a slow unraveling. Kelly began dropping hints, asking me casually if I had thought about downsizing. Jason commented on the upkeep of the yard, suggesting that I might be happier in a place without responsibilities. At night, I could hear them whispering behind closed doors, their voices low but urgent. Sometimes I caught fragments: transfer, sell, move her out, words that clawed at my chest and made sleep impossible. One morning, I found Kelly in the living room, sorting through stacks of mail as though it belonged to her. "Just organizing, Mom," she said breezily. But I saw the way her eyes lingered on the bank statements, the way her fingers traced the numbers with hunger. Later that week, Jason sold Frank's old car without asking, claiming it was impractical to keep it sitting in the garage. Each decision chipped away at me, reminding me that I was slowly being erased from the very life I had built. I tried to fight back in small ways. I refused to part with my art supplies, though Kelly scoffed and called them junk. I cooked dinners even when they ordered takeout, insisting that traditions mattered. But each resistance was met with sharper words, colder stares. Kelly's patience thinned, her tone hardening into commands. And yet, beneath my fear, something else began to stir. A quiet defiance. A whisper of the woman I used to be before motherhood demanded all of me. I started paying closer attention, noticing the inconsistencies in Kelly's stories, the way she flinched when I mentioned Frank's will. She had grown too comfortable, too certain that I would remain the obedient mother, pliant and silent. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into Frank's old study. The room smelled faintly of his cologne, the leather of his chair creaking as I sank into it. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the last serious conversation we had before his heart gave out. He had been unusually thoughtful, speaking of the future, of wanting me to feel secure. "You'll never be alone, Linda," he had promised. "I've made sure of it." At the time, I thought he was merely trying to ease my worries. Now, sitting in that quiet room, I wondered if his words carried a weight I had not understood. The thought lodged itself in my mind like a seed. Perhaps there was more to Frank's planning than I realized. Perhaps Kelly's confidence was built not on truth, but on a lie. I began to watch her more closely after that, memorizing the sharpness of her tone, the calculation in her eyes, the way Jason's hand always seemed to tighten around hers whenever I questioned them. Something in my gut told me this was only the beginning, that the battle for my dignity and my home had just begun. And though I felt the weight of betrayal pressing down on me, heavier than age, heavier than grief, I also felt a flicker of resolve. They believed I was powerless, a burden to be discarded, but they had underestimated the strength that comes from a lifetime of sacrifice. They had forgotten that even a quiet woman can carry storms within her. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the whispers of their plotting drifting down the hallway, I made myself a silent promise. I would not be erased. I would not surrender my life, my home, or the memory of the man who built it with me. Something was deeply wrong, and I intended to uncover it, no matter the cost. Because sometimes it takes being pushed to the edge to finally realize that the edge is not where you end, it's where you begin to fight. Tuesday morning began with the same deceptive calm as every other day. Sunlight spilling through the lace curtains, the aroma of coffee drifting from the kitchen. I had convinced myself that if I just stayed quiet, the storm brewing inside my daughter might pass. But storms do not pass. When there is wealth at stake, they grow, they sharpen, and they strike without warning. I was folding laundry in the living room when the front door opened, and Kelly walked in with 2 suitcases. Her heels echoed against the hardwood, each click a warning shot. She set the bags down with a thud and looked at me with a smile that carried no warmth. "According to Dad's will, I inherited everything," she announced, her voice light but edged with victory. "You've been staying here out of my kindness." The air seemed to vanish from the room. I stared at her, my breath catching in my throat, the pile of folded towels slipping from my hands. For a moment, I could not even summon words, my mind reeling at the audacity of her claim. This was my home, the place where Frank and I had built a life from scratch, the place where Kelly had taken her first steps. And yet she stood there, suitcase in hand, rewriting history with the confidence of someone who believed her lies would go unchallenged. I wanted to scream, to demand she show me this so-called will. But her tone, her posture, the cold certainty in her eyes froze me in place. My body felt heavy, pinned down by decades of silence, by years of being the accommodating mother. My lips parted, but before I could speak, Jason appeared behind her, car keys in hand. "Let's not drag this out," he said smoothly, his voice rehearsed like a man delivering closing arguments. "We'll get you settled." The next thing I knew, I was sitting in the passenger seat of Jason's car, clutching my purse like it was a lifeline. The world outside the window blurred past strip malls, gas stations, the familiar roads that had once carried Frank and me to church, to family picnics, to quiet Sunday drives. My heart pounded, each beat screaming against the betrayal. Jason drove in silence, his eyes fixed ahead, his jaw tight. Kelly sat in the back, scrolling through her phone, as if this were a chore she simply needed to check off her list. After what felt like an eternity, the car slowed in front of a dingy motel, whose neon sign flickered half dead. The parking lot was cracked, littered with empty bottles, the kind of place where lost souls linger. Jason parked and got out without a word. Kelly tossed a crumpled wad of bills into my lap. $200. This should cover a few nights, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Be independent again, Mom. I stared at the money, the green paper blurring through my tears. Independent. The word twisted, like a knife. I had been nothing but independent once, long before I gave up my art, my ambitions, my very self to raise her, to build a family. And now that sacrifice was being thrown back at me, packaged as charity. I stepped out of the car slowly, the gravel crunching beneath my shoes, the stench of stale smoke clinging to the humid air. Kelly didn't bother to get out. Jason started the engine again, and within seconds the taillights disappeared down the road, leaving me standing there like an abandoned parcel. For the first time in my life, I felt truly discarded, not just overlooked or undervalued, but erased. Inside, the motel room was dim, the carpet stained, the air conditioner rattling like an old cough. I set my suitcase on the bed and sat down, my body trembling. The silence pressed in, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the muffled voices from the room next door. I buried my face in my hands and allowed myself to cry, not the soft, restrained tears I had shed at Frank's funeral, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook through me like a storm finally breaking. When the sobs subsided, I stared at the cracked ceiling and remembered something. Months before Frank died, he had shown me a document, his will. I could still see him that evening, sitting on the porch with a glass of iced tea, his voice steady as he handed me the envelope. I just want you to feel secure, Linda, he had said, his eyes meeting mine with a weight I didn't fully understand then. The details were hazy now, blurred by grief, but I remembered clearly that it was not Kelly who held the power in that paper. No, Frank had written something different. A spark lit inside me, faint but insistent. If Frank's will said one thing and Kelly claimed another, then there was only one explanation. She was lying. My daughter, my flesh and blood, had forged or manipulated the truth to strip me of everything. And if she thought I was too weak, too broken to fight back, then she had underestimated me. The next morning, with my last few dollars in my purse and determination in my chest, I boarded a city bus. The seats were worn, the air smelled faintly of gasoline and dust, but I sat there upright, clutching the pole as the city moved around me. Each stop brought me closer to downtown, closer to the one man who could confirm the truth, Samuel Blake, our family lawyer. I remembered the countless times Frank and I had sat in his office, signing papers, discussing investments, always with trust. Samuel was thorough, discreet, and loyal. If anyone knew the truth, it was him. As the bus jolted forward, I watched strangers climb on and off, each lost in their own world, their own battles, invisible but real. I wondered if any of them could see mine, the widow cast aside by her only child, the woman stripped of her home and dignity. Yet beneath the pain, I felt something I hadn't in weeks. Resolve. I was not finished. Not yet. By the time the bus reached downtown, the morning sun had risen high, bouncing off glass buildings and turning the sidewalks into rivers of light. I stepped off with shaking knees but a steady heart, making my way toward Samuel's office. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My daughter might think she had written the ending to my story, but she had forgotten one thing. Endings belong only to those who survive. And I intended to survive. The building that housed Samuel Blake's law office stood tall among the glass and steel towers of downtown, its stone facade weathered but dignified, much like Samuel himself. As I pushed through the heavy oak doors, the scent of polished wood and old paper greeted me, a reminder of the countless times Frank and I had walked these halls together. My heart pounded, each beat a mixture of dread and fragile hope. Would Samuel still recognize me after months of absence? Would he believe the trembling widow standing before him, stripped of everything by her own child? The receptionist looked up as I approached, her eyes kind but curious. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked. "No," I replied softly, clutching the strap of my purse tighter. "But please, tell Mr. Blake that Linda Walker is here. He'll want to see me." Minutes later, Samuel appeared, his silver hair a little thinner than I remembered, his round glasses perched on his nose. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Linda? My goodness, I was told you were away on vacation. Kelly said you needed a break." The words pierced me like shards of ice. Kelly had been weaving lies even here, covering her tracks with fabrications. My hands shook as I reached for his. "No, Samuel, I was never away. I was thrown out of my own house." He ushered me into his office, concern etched deep into his features. The moment the door closed behind us, the facade I had been holding crumbled, and I poured out the story how Kelly had presented a will, claiming everything was hers, how Jason had driven me to a motel, how they had abandoned me with a pitiful handful of bills. Samuel listened in silence, his brow furrowed, his hands clasped tightly on the desk. When I finished, he stood slowly, walked to a cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder. "Linda," he said gently, "I think you need to see something." "Ugh." He laid the papers on the desk and slid them toward me. My breath caught as I recognized Frank's handwriting, his familiar signature scrawled with confidence across the bottom of the final page. It was the real will, the one Frank had shown me months before. My hands trembled as I traced the words with my fingers, reading slowly, deliberately, as though savoring proof of my own sanity. 70% of the estate, including the house, and $23 million was left to me. Kelly was to receive $10 million, but only on the condition that she treated me with respect and dignity. My eyes blurred with tears as the truth settled over me. Kelly had not only lied, she had committed fraud. She had broken the very condition that secured her inheritance. Samuel's voice was steady, though tinged with outrage. "Linda, what your daughter has done is not just morally wrong, it's criminal. She misrepresented the will, manipulated you, and attempted to seize control of assets that were not hers. This is elder abuse, plain and simple." I pressed the back of my hand to my mouth, trying to hold back the sob that rose within me. All the sleepless nights, the self-doubt, the fear that perhaps I was losing my mind, it all dissolved in that moment. I had been right to trust Frank, right to remember his words. He had prepared for this, as though he had known that even blood could turn against me. "What do I do now?" I whispered, my voice cracking. Samuel leaned forward, his eyes sharp with determination. "Now, Linda, we fight. We take this to the courts. We freeze the accounts before Kelly can siphon another cent. We report what she and Jason have done. You are not powerless. You hold every card." For the first time since Frank's passing, I felt something other than grief or fear. I felt the stirrings of power, fragile but undeniable, blooming inside me like the first crocus pushing through snow. Kelly had treated me like a pawn, disposable and weak. But Frank's foresight had transformed me into something greater. I left Samuel's office with copies of the will clutched tightly in my purse, the spring air crisp against my skin. The city hummed around me, indifferent to my revelation, but inside I felt a storm gathering strength. I knew Kelly would not surrender easily. She had built her life on manipulation, on twisting truths, until they bent to her will. But this time, she would face consequences she had never imagined. That night in the motel, I could hardly sleep. I lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the distant hum of traffic, my mind replaying every cruel word Kelly had hurled at me. "You're useless now. This is our house, not yours." But with every repetition, the sting lessened, replaced by resolve. She had underestimated me. She had mistaken my silence for weakness, my love for blindness. She would soon learn that even the quietest voice can shatter lies when armed with truth. In the early hours of dawn, I rose from the lumpy mattress and stood by the window. The neon motel sign flickered, bathing the parking lot in pale red light. Somewhere across town, Kelly and Jason were likely congratulating themselves, believing I had been tucked away, silenced forever. I smiled faintly at the thought of their shock when they discovered I was no longer their victim but their reckoning, because this was no longer just about protecting my home or my inheritance. This was about dignity, about the years I had given, about the truth Frank had entrusted to me. Kelly believed she had won, but she had broken the one condition that mattered most: respect and dignity. And now, she was about to lose everything. I turned away from the window, my heart steady for the first time in weeks. The fight had begun, and I was ready. Morning sunlight spilled through the blinds of the motel room, cutting across the threadbare carpet in sharp lines. I had barely slept, yet my mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. The will in my purse felt like a secret weapon pressed against my side, a shield forged by Frank's foresight. For so long, I had let Kelly dictate the rhythm of my life, her voice louder, her needs heavier, her disdain sharper than any words I could summon. But now, the tide had shifted. For the first time, I held something stronger than guilt or obligation. I held the truth. I returned to Samuel's office that morning, and together we began unraveling the web Kelly had spun. Samuel was meticulous, moving through documents with the precision of a surgeon. He explained each clause of the will again, his voice steady, his eyes flashing with restrained anger. "Linda," he said, tapping the paper where Frank's signature rested, "your husband was deliberate. He wanted to ensure you were cared for, protected. He even added that condition, about respect and dignity for Kelly, likely because he knew her tendencies. Frank may be gone, but his voice is here in writing. This cannot be ignored." Hearing those words, I felt tears slip down my cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of vindication, of a woman who had doubted herself for too long, finally realizing she had not imagined the betrayal. I had not been weak or delusional. My instincts had been right. Samuel leaned back, folding his hands. "The next step is straightforward. We notify the courts, freeze the accounts, and confront Kelly with the truth. But Linda, you need to prepare yourself. This will not only be a legal fight, it will be an emotional one. She will lash out, she will deny, and she will try to twist this to her advantage. You need to be ready." I nodded slowly, the weight of his words sinking in. Ready. The word echoed inside me. For decades, I had lived in the shadows of others, Frank's ambitions, Kelly's demands, society's expectations of what a wife and mother should be. But perhaps all those years had been preparing me for this moment, sharpening my resilience until it gleamed. Leaving Samuel's office, I walked through the city with my shoulders squared, the bustle of pedestrians and honking cars fading into background noise. The air felt different on my skin, crisp with possibility. I was no longer the woman abandoned in a motel with a wad of crumpled bills. I was Linda Walker, widow, mother, and now the rightful heir to the life Frank and I had built. That afternoon, I called Kelly. My hands trembled slightly as I dialed her number, but my voice, when she answered, came out calm, almost cold. "I'm with the lawyer," I said, pausing to let the words sink in. "Remember him? The one who read the will, while you lied that I was out of town." There was a silence on the other end, followed by the sharp intake of her breath. "Mom, I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered, her voice teetering between indignation and panic. "Oh, you know exactly what I'm talking about," I replied. "The will. The one that left me 70% of everything. The one that gave you $10 million only if you treated me with respect and dignity. Do you really want to discuss how well you've honored that condition? Her voice rose, desperate now. You don't understand. Jason said. She stopped abruptly, realizing she had revealed more than she intended. My heart twisted painfully, but I steadied myself. This was not the time for pity. I understand perfectly, I said firmly. You tried to erase me. You lied, you stole, and you left me in a filthy motel as though I were trash. But the truth is out now, Kelly. You've lost everything you thought you won. I ended the call before she could reply, my hand shaking but my heart steady. For the first time in years, I had spoken without fear, without bending to her moods. It felt like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime of shadows. Samuel moved quickly after that. Legal notices were drafted, banks were contacted, accounts frozen. Every move was precise. Like a chess game Frank had started long before his death, and I began to see myself not as the pawn pushed across the board, but as the queen Frank had trusted me to become. That evening, as I sat alone in the motel room, I replayed my life like a film reel. I saw the young woman who had once dreamed of painting, the new mother who had rocked a colicky baby to sleep, the wife who had stood beside Frank through lean years and prosperous ones. I saw all the versions of myself I had hidden away, the sacrifices I had made, the quiet strength I had carried, and I realized something profound. I had not been diminished by age, or by loss, or even by betrayal. I had only been waiting for the moment when all that endurance would become my greatest weapon. The next morning, Kelly showed up at the motel. She stood in the doorway, her eyes swollen, her voice trembling. Mom, please. I made terrible mistakes. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. Jason pressured me. She reached for me, her hands shaking. For a heartbeat, I saw not the manipulative woman she had become, but the child she once was. The little girl who used to curl in my lap when thunderstorms rattled the windows. But then I remembered the venom in her voice when she had thrown me out. You're useless now. This is our house, not yours. I remembered the cold smirk as she tossed those bills into my lap. My heart hardened. Love can forgive, but it does not erase. I pulled a small envelope from my purse and handed it to her. Inside was a copy of Frank's recorded message, a video he had made weeks before his death. Samuel had given it to me as part of the will. Kelly's hands shook as she slid the disc into her laptop, her face paling as Frank's voice filled the room. Kelly, Frank said, his voice calm but unyielding. If you're watching this, it means you have failed to honor the conditions of my will. I left you provision not out of obligation, but out of hope that you would treat your mother with kindness, that you would rise to the better parts of yourself. If you have not, then you have lost not only my trust, but also the inheritance I left you. Choices have consequences, even for family. Kelly's sobs filled the silence that followed, her body folding in on itself. I watched her cry, my own heart aching, but I did not move to comfort her. Some lessons cannot be softened. Some truths must be borne alone. As she looked up at me with pleading eyes, I finally spoke. You didn't just lose money, Kelly. You lost my trust. And that is something no lawyer, no inheritance, no apology can ever buy back. The turning point had come, and I was no longer the woman she could discard. I was the woman her father had believed in, the woman who had endured, and the woman who now stood unshaken. The days that followed blurred into a whirlwind of preparation, legal motions filed, phone calls made, accounts frozen with the swiftness of Samuel's expertise. But for me, the true climax began with a single phone call, a confrontation long overdue. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, my cell phone trembling in my hand, the late afternoon sun streaking through the blinds like golden bars. My reflection in the cracked mirror across the room showed a woman I barely recognized, not broken, not discarded, but sharpened by betrayal into something unyielding. When Kelly answered, her tone was clipped, defensive, as though she had been waiting for this reckoning. "Mom, what do you want?" "I'm with the lawyer," I said calmly, each word deliberate, carrying the weight of the truth. "Remember him? The one who read the will aloud while you told people I was away on vacation. Do you recall that, Kelly?" The silence on the line was sharp enough to cut glass. Then she exhaled quickly, her voice faltering. You don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, but I do," I said, my voice steady, no longer trembling with fear. "I've seen the will with my own eyes. 70% of the estate belongs to me. The house is mine. The accounts are mine. You were given $10 million, but only on the condition that you treated me with respect and dignity. Tell me, Kelly, do you think abandoning me at a seedy motel qualifies as respect? Do you believe screaming that I was useless fulfills the requirement of dignity?" Her voice cracked then, panic bleeding through the veneer of control. "Jason said it was the only way, Mom. You don't understand. We needed—" "Jason?" I cut her off. "Don't you dare blame this on anyone else. You made your choice, Kelly. You looked into your mother's eyes and decided greed mattered more than blood. And now you've lost everything your father hoped to give you." I could almost hear her breath hitching, the way a child might sob before admitting a lie. But this was no child. This was a grown woman who had calculated betrayal down to the cent, who had wielded cruelty like a weapon. That same evening, Samuel contacted the authorities. His voice on the phone was calm but resolute. "Linda, what your daughter and son-in-law did qualifies as fraud and elder abuse. Law enforcement will handle it from here." Hearing those words, I felt a strange mix of sorrow and vindication. It should never have come to this, my own daughter facing handcuffs because of her choices. Yet part of me knew justice was the only language she would ever understand. 2 days later, it happened. I was sitting in Samuel's office when the call came. Kelly and Jason had been arrested. Their accounts were frozen, their access stripped away, their smug confidence dismantled in a single stroke. I imagined Kelly's face as the officers read her rights, the disbelief giving way to rage, then fear. I imagined Jason's jaw tightening, his smooth words faltering as reality finally caught him. But the climax was not just in their downfall. It was in what came next, when Kelly appeared at the doorstep of the motel. Her once polished appearance crumbling, her hair was unkempt, her makeup smeared, her eyes red from crying. She stood there trembling, clutching her arms as though she were the victim, not the architect of this tragedy. "Mom," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "Please, I need you. I made terrible mistakes. Jason convinced me I was scared. I didn't know what to do." I stared at her, torn between the instinct to comfort and the memory of her venom. The image of her tossing that crumpled wad of bills at me, sneering as she called me useless, flashed through my mind like lightning. "You left me with nothing," I said quietly, my voice colder than I thought myself capable of. "You watched me walk into that motel as though I were a stranger you no longer owed love to. You stood in the house your father built and told me it was yours. Tell me, Kelly, why should I believe this plea is anything more than another manipulation?" Her tears streamed freely, her body shaking. "Because I'm your daughter," she cried. For a long moment, the words hung in the air. Your daughter. Once, those words would have been enough to unravel me, to soften me, to draw me into forgiveness. But now, they sounded hollow, an echo of something that had once been sacred but had been shattered by greed. "You're right," I said finally, my voice steady. "You are my daughter, and that is exactly why this hurts more than anything else in my life. But being my daughter doesn't excuse you. It doesn't erase what you did. Choices have consequences, Kelly, even for family." Her sobs filled the hallway, loud and raw, but I did not reach out to her. I could not. Not yet. Perhaps not ever. Kelly's sobs echoed down the dim hallway of that shabby motel, but I stood rooted in place, watching her as though she were a stranger. For years, I had been conditioned to step in whenever she cried, to soothe, to sacrifice, to bend myself until she was comforted. Yet now, seeing her broken posture, I realized that her tears were not born of remorse, but of fear. Fear of losing the fortune she thought she had secured. Fear of facing the consequences of her choices. She had mistaken desperation for repentance, and I could no longer mistake it for love. Inside, my chest ached with a dull heaviness. No mother dreams of a climax like this, her only child kneeling, begging, undone not by tragedy, but by her own greed. I remembered the little girl Kelly once was, the child who had clung to me during thunderstorms, who had whispered, "Don't leave me," when nightmares chased her from sleep. How had that girl grown into this woman before me? A woman who would strip her own mother of dignity for the promise of money? That was the question that hollowed me, more painful than any wound. "Please, Mom." Kelly choked out, her voice trembling. "I'll fix everything. I'll change. Just don't let them take everything from me." For a long time I said nothing, my silence heavier than words. At last, I turned, retrieved a small envelope from my purse, and placed it in her shaking hands. Inside was a disc, the video Frank had recorded weeks before his heart betrayed him. I had debated when to show it, but now, with her tears soaking her cheeks, it felt like the only language she might understand. She slid it into her laptop, and for a moment the screen flickered before settling on Frank's familiar face. My breath caught at the sight of him, alive again for a brief moment, his voice filling the room with that steady calm I had loved all my life. "Kelly," Frank began, his eyes serious, his words deliberate. "If you're watching this, it means you failed to honor the will I left behind. I gave you provision not as entitlement but as a test of character. Your mother has given her life to you, to me, to this family. I wanted to ensure she was respected, valued, cared for. If you could not manage even that, then you do not deserve what I left for you. Choices matter, integrity matters. If you've lost them, then you've lost everything." And the video ended, and silence swelled in the room, broken only by Kelly's ragged breathing. She clutched the laptop as though she might shake it back to life, as though she might argue with the man who had loved her most. But Frank's words were unyielding, written in stone, and I saw the moment they struck her fully. Her face crumpled, her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked truly defeated. She turned to me then, her voice cracked, her eyes pleading. "Mom, please, he didn't mean it. He didn't understand. I can still change. I can be better. Just don't let them take it all away." I studied her, my heart split between love and justice. A part of me longed to gather her into my arms, to whisper that everything would be all right, to erase the pain etched into her face, but another part, the part that had been left in a motel with crumpled bills, the part that had cried alone in a room that stank of smoke and despair, knew that compassion without accountability was nothing more than enabling. I stood tall, my voice calm, resolute. "Your father understood more than you ever realized. He knew your weaknesses, Kelly, and he hoped you would rise above them. But you chose otherwise. You betrayed not only me but him. This isn't about money. It's about dignity, respect, and truth. And those are things you cannot buy back." Her tears spilled freely, her body shaking as though the ground beneath her had collapsed. "So that's it? You're just going to let me lose everything? You lost it yourself," I said softly. "The moment you chose greed over family, cruelty over compassion. I am not taking anything from you. You gave it away." She collapsed onto the bed, her sobs echoing in the silence, but I did not move to comfort her. My heart wept silently, but my resolve remained. Some lessons in life cannot be softened, cannot be shielded by a mother's embrace. Some lessons must be faced raw, searing, and unmerciful, so that the truth carves itself deep enough to never be forgotten. As I left the room, the air outside felt sharp and clean. The night sky spread wide above me. For the first time, in what felt like an eternity, I inhaled without heaviness. The storm had broken, and though its aftermath would linger, I had endured. Kelly had fallen, not because I had pushed her, but because her own choices had carried her there. Walking back to Samuel's office the next morning, I felt the weight of years lift from my shoulders. I had confronted the child who had betrayed me. I had stood firm in the face of tears that once would have undone me, and I had honored Frank's trust. The climax was not about revenge, it was about reclaiming myself, about standing unshaken even when my heart ached. And as the city stirred awake around me, I realized something profound. I was no longer just surviving. I was becoming someone new, someone stronger, someone who finally understood that love, to be true, must walk hand in hand with respect. 6 months have passed since the night I watched my daughter collapse under the weight of her own choices, and life, though marked with scars, has blossomed into something I never imagined. My home, once haunted by betrayal, now breathes with a sense of renewal. The walls have been repainted, the hardwood floors refinished, the garden replanted with rows of roses that burst into color each morning. Standing on the porch, I often feel as though Frank is with me, his presence woven into every detail of the house he once promised would always be my safe place. He kept that promise, even in death. The legal proceedings unfolded swiftly after Kelly and Jason's arrest. I sat in court, my hands folded neatly in my lap, listening as the charges of fraud and elder abuse were read aloud. My heart ached with every mention of their names, but I kept my gaze steady, refusing to crumble. When the judge delivered their sentence, 18 months in federal custody, I felt no triumph, only a quiet release. Justice had spoken, not with vengeance, but with clarity. They were not beyond redemption, but they would now be forced to face consequences they had tried so desperately to escape. With Frank's estate restored to me, I faced choices of my own. For a while, I simply moved through the days cautiously, savoring the peace that returned to my home, reacquainting myself with solitude. But soon I realized that peace without purpose can turn to emptiness. The ordeal had awakened something inside me, a fire I thought had long gone cold. I could not ignore the truth I had lived, that too many elders suffer silently, stripped of dignity by the very people meant to protect them. I had walked that path, and I knew I could not stand by while others did the same. And so, the Linda Walker Foundation for Elder Protection was born. I invested $15 million into its creation, ensuring that seniors who faced exploitation would have legal aid, counseling, and a voice when they felt voiceless. What began as a personal act of healing soon grew into a movement. Volunteers poured in, lawyers offered their services, and seniors across the state reached out with stories that mirrored my own. It was heartbreaking and empowering all at once. Each story reminded me that my pain had purpose, that my survival could be a lantern guiding others through their own darkness. Life has not been without its strange twists. A well-known streaming company contacted me, eager to turn my story into a documentary. At first, I hesitated. Did I really want the world to see my private grief, my daughter's betrayal, my tears in that motel room? But then I remembered the nights I sat alone, believing I was the only one suffering, and how much I would have given to know I wasn't alone. So, I agreed. Cameras moved through my house, capturing not just the polished surfaces, but the raw edges of my truth. The documentary will premiere later this year, and I hope it will not only expose betrayal, but also celebrate resilience. My days now hum with a rhythm of purpose. I wake early, walk through the garden, then spend hours at the foundation's office, listening to seniors, strategizing with lawyers, shaping programs that will outlive me. In the evenings, I paint again something I had not done in decades. The canvases bloom with color, each stroke carrying pieces of my healing. My art, once abandoned, has returned like an old friend, reminding me that I am more than the roles I played, more than the sacrifices I made. I am Linda Walker, mother, widow, survivor, advocate, artist. Sometimes, when I sit with my paintbrush, memories of Kelly creep in. She writes to me from prison, occasionally letters filled with apologies, promises, pleas for forgiveness. I read them carefully, my heart tugged between longing and caution. I want to believe her words, but I have learned that forgiveness is not a door one simply unlocks. It is a journey, one step at a time. For now, I respond with kindness but not with reconciliation. She must walk her own road, rebuild her own soul, before the bridge between us can be crossed. Jason, on the other hand, has remained silent. Perhaps pride seals his lips, or perhaps he knows his words would mean little. Either way, his absence matters less to me than Kelly's struggle. He was never my blood, never the child I once rocked to sleep. He was a shadow passing through our family's story, and though his influence was toxic, it is Kelly's choices that cut deepest. Despite it all, I do not feel bitter. The ordeal has given me clarity. I now know that family is not defined solely by blood, but by actions, by the people who stand beside you when the world falls apart. Friends have become my chosen family neighbors who bring casseroles, volunteers who spend late nights drafting legal petitions, strangers who stop me on the street to say, "Thank you for speaking up." Their kindness has woven a new safety net around me, one stitched with genuine care rather than obligation. Looking back, I see my journey in chapters. The first was sacrifice, the years of giving without question. The second was loss, the heartache of Frank's death and Kelly's betrayal. But now, I live in the third chapter, renewal. A chapter where I reclaim my identity, where I wield the strength I had buried beneath decades of silence, where I stand not just for myself but for others. On quiet evenings, I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, the scent of roses drifting from the garden, and I feel Frank's presence in the breeze that rustles the leaves. I whisper to him, telling him about the foundation, about the seniors we've helped, about the colors I've brought back to canvas. I imagine him smiling, proud, perhaps even relieved that his foresight protected me and propelled me into a purpose larger than grief. From abandoned widow to empowered woman, those words echo inside me now like a vow. I am not merely surviving, I am thriving. The scars remain, but they do not define me. Instead, they shine like threads of gold woven into porcelain, proof that what was once broken can become more beautiful than before. When I look back at everything that happened, from the night my daughter screamed that I was useless to the moment I stood tall in a courtroom reclaiming my dignity, I realize this story was never just about money or inheritance. It was about identity, resilience, and the quiet strength that so many of us carry until life demands we finally wield it. For too long, I believed my worth was measured by what I gave my time, my sacrifices, my silence. But betrayal has a cruel way of teaching you the truth. Your value is not determined by who loves you or who abandons you. Your value is yours, unshakable, even when the world tries to strip it away. I share this not to dwell on the pain, but to remind anyone listening that family is not simply defined by blood. Family is who stands beside you when you are weakest, who honors your dignity even when it is inconvenient. And if those closest to you fail that test, you still have the right and the power to stand tall, to claim your worth, and to protect yourself. Healing did not arrive all at once for me. It came slowly, like sunlight creeping through closed curtains, reminding me day by day that brokenness can bloom into something stronger. I rebuilt my life, not because I was extraordinary, but because I finally believed I deserved more than survival. And if I, a 67-year-old widow once abandoned in a cheap motel, can rise, so can you. So here is my message. Do not let betrayal define you. Do not let cruelty silence you. Even when it comes from those you love most, you are still worthy of respect, safety, and joy. Protect yourself. Speak your truth. And know that you are never too old, too broken, or too forgotten to begin again. If my story touched you, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and share your own story in the comments. Because every mother deserves to be heard, every survivor deserves a voice, and every one of us deserves a community that will not turn away when we need it most.